Today, we have a crazy revenge story about a boss firing people out of the blue. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I sold my house while my ex was still living in it. When I was 20, I already had my own hair salon and it was doing pretty well. I worked very hard and went from making a decent income to making a lot of money. Women would fly from other states to have me do their hair. I was truly blessed. I didn't have any siblings. It was just me, my mom, and my dad, who were very old at the time. My parents had a 27-year age gap. At 21, I bought myself a small 2-bedroom house and moved out of my parents'. It was a tiny house, but it was beautiful and had all the modern stuff that I wanted. I loved it there. Despite having nearly everything I ever dreamed of, my own house, my own salon, a busy business, great friends, and money to satisfy my needs and some of my wants, I still felt something was missing. I wanted a love life for myself. I was 21, but I'd never been in a relationship. In high school, I never dated anyone, mostly because I was always busy working and trying to make money. I was hardly ever present at school events because I spent my time helping the other girls fix their hair and getting paid for it. I never did any fun stuff with my friends either. My dad was retired, and my mom didn't make a lot of money, so I had to step in. I did have one friend, Lucy. Lucy would come with me sometimes when I had to style someone's hair so we could spend time together. Sometimes she helped me work too, and I'd in turn give her some of the money or take us both to lunch or dinner afterward. Anyway, I started to feel very lonely and incomplete without a romantic relationship. I spoke to Lucy about how I felt, and she asked me to try getting on a dating website she was on before she met her boyfriend. Dating sites didn't have the popularity and acceptability that it has now. At the time, it was kind of embarrassing and desperate for a woman to be on a dating site, and women who were on dating sites were older women who already had kids or had been married. I refused to get on the site. I just didn't think it made sense. One day, Lucy pointed out that my chance of finding a man was low because of the kind of job I did. I was almost always working, and I worked with women only. I agreed with her and signed up on the dating site. For the first few months, I didn't meet anyone I liked. I started a few conversations and all that, but none led anywhere until I met my ex. When he matched with me, I looked up his profile and thought he was cute. It was on his profile that he was studying at a university in my town, so I especially liked that about him. We started to text, and shortly after, we exchanged phone numbers and talked nearly every night before we went to bed. After months of talking on the phone and exchanging stories about our lives, we decided to set up a date. He suggested that we have dinner on a Saturday. I agreed, and he came to my salon that evening to pick me up. Saturdays are always busy days for me, so there was no time to go back home and change. I could tell that he was impressed with my salon. He praised me for being so successful at such a young age, and we drove to the restaurant. At the time, I thought he was a sweet guy for complimenting me about how hard I work. I knew I had heard about guys who'd get jealous of women who had something going on for them, so I was glad he wasn't that kind of guy. I mentioned that evening that I'm glad he's in uni and that I plan to go to college in my mid-20s. He just smiled and changed the topic. After a year of being together, I found out that he dropped out after his freshman year in college. By the time I realized that my ex was not in college and was practically a bum, I was already head over heels in love with him. He said he hated college and preferred to go to a culinary school where he'd upgrade his cooking skills and start a food business. I supported him wholeheartedly and even paid for a culinary school, but after 5 months, he quit. I was frustrated, but it was always hard to be mad at him. Whenever I got mad, he'd apologize profusely and then make me feel like a horrible person for kicking him when he was down. Despite how lazy and sloppy he was, I continued to tolerate him and tell myself that at least he wasn't cheating on me. I wasn't dealing with infidelity like many of the women I met in the salon. By the way, he moved in with me barely 6 months after we started dating, and I did all the providing and most of the cleaning. Lucy and even my mom told me many times to break up with him, but I refused. I don't think his slothfulness was a big problem. I made enough money to take care of the two of us, and let's face it, I was desperate and just thought it was better to have a loyal man who didn't have a job than no man at all. After 4 years, I got sick of him. I would return from the salon late at night and the house would be a huge mess. From the kitchen to our bedroom, I was sick of it. I also hated how he drove my car around, and when I needed the car, I'd have to call and wait for him to come with it. Sometimes I'd just call Lucy to ask if I could borrow her car. I had had enough and I wanted him out of my house. Whenever I threatened to break up, he would get on his knees, beg me not to end things, and promise to change. I'd forgive him, and then in a month, he'd go back to being sloppy and annoying. I broke up with him on the day of Lucy's engagement party. The event was supposed to start at 9 p.m., but I had to be there earlier for my friend, and it was 6 p.m. I was in the salon waiting for my ex to come and get me so we could go together. I got dressed, the close sign was up, but my ex still hadn't come around. I would have just gone alone, but my ex was in my car. I called and called, but he didn't pick up. Then I called Lucy to tell her I might be late. I was just about to explain what was going on when she got really pissed. She yelled at me and hung up. I was upset about what had happened, but I still had to be there for my friend. I called one of the girls who worked for me at the salon and asked to borrow her car. Thankfully, she drove me to the salon and let me borrow her car. While all these happened, there was still no word from my ex. When I returned home that midnight, my ex tried to explain in his usual manner why he was unable to take my calls, but I wasn't interested in his explanation. I just went to bed. The next day, I told him I was done and asked him to leave my house. And guess what? He refused. I was livid. He said I couldn't put him out and then mentioned how he was protected by some laws. That day, as I drove to the salon, I parked my car and called Lucy. I apologized for bothering her and asked to speak with her fiancé. I wanted to know if my ex was right, and Lucy's fiancé was a lawyer, so he would know. My ex was right. I could not put him out immediately. Lucy's fiancé suggested I send him a note, which would serve as a notice to him, but I had to give him 6 months to find a place. I was frustrated. I drove back home and asked him to leave again. This time, he was mean and nasty. He said really vile things to me and told me there was nothing I could do to get him to leave. I got very angry and threw a frying pan at him. He immediately ran outside and called the cops. That night, the police removed me from my own house. When I was finally allowed to return home, I saw that my ex had moved all my stuff into the guest bedroom. I was shocked, but I blamed myself. Everyone warned me. When I told Lucy, she wasn't comfortable with me living with him, so she told me to pack my essentials and move in with her and her fiancé. After I moved out, my ex probably had a party. He figured I was too weak to do anything or that I'd just wait until he moved out, which was never going to happen. Shortly after, my neighbor told me that my ex was hosting different women in my house. He also had different friends come in. I'm sure he thought it was over, that he'd won and gotten a free home. At this time, I had moved out of Lucy's home and was renting a place while looking to buy a nicer house. I contacted a realtor and told her I wanted to sell my house. She immediately swung into action and went on to put a for sale sign in front of the house. When my ex saw this sign, he started calling me, trying to apologize and even lying about buying the house. He said since I wanted to sell the house, I might as well just sell it to him. This was someone who had no money and no job. The sign in front of the house was reducing his street credibility, and the girls he brought home were asking what was going on. I ignored all his voice messages, so he came over to the salon where I'd given clear instructions to the security guy to never let him in. When my realtor wanted to come in for a showing, he changed the locks in the house and locked himself in it. The realtor had to get a court order to forcefully eject him from the house and turn in the keys. He was forcefully removed by the cops, but he returned after the realtor was done showing the house. He kept living in the house until we found a buyer. The buyer was a woman in her late 20s. My pathetic ex found out about who she was and went to her, trying to get her to let him live with her. He then badmouthed me and said I contributed to the down payment for the house, but I was trying to take advantage of him because I had more money. She called me and I told her all that's happened in our relationship. I even had Lucy talk to her as my witness. She was disgusted by him and immediately called the cops again. Since he disobeyed court orders and returned to a house he was forcefully ejected from, he got a sentence and had to do time. You know what's so cool in all these is how I didn't ever have to do anything to him directly. I just moved out and let the others who were involved, like the realtor and the new owner, do their thing. Also, hi, my name is Brendan, and if you guys enjoy these nuclear revenge videos, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to our podcast. That said, our next story is, my boss decided to throw me under the bus. I decided to pay him back in the same manner. My selfish boss decided to take all the credit for all the long hours and hard work I had put into the project assigned to us by the CEO, thinking that he has all of the right to do so, being my boss and all. I would have obviously let this slide were this had been the first time something like this would have happened. However, that was not the case, and I wasn't willing to let this slide, as I thought he needed to be put in his place, and who better to do that than myself? I, 32-year-old male, worked in a tech company for the better part of the past 6 years. I had been in this company since the very moment I graduated from college. I was referred to apply to the company's internship program while I was still in college by my roommate. He suggested this to me as he has a family member that was working at the company at the time, and he was given the opportunity to apply himself. But seeing as his interest lay somewhere else, he decided not to let the opportunity go to waste, and instead refer someone he knew and trusted. Now, this was quite generous of him, I must say, as this was quite literally an opportunity that came but once in one's life. This company in question is one of the leading tech companies, and at the time, basically almost everyone I knew were either trying to get accepted into their internship program, or in the same vein, trying to get employed by the company itself. It was seen as a really competitive company, as they were quite literally the best in their industry. The branch I was very much interested in was the programming department, where basically all of the main work was being carried out. And seeing as this was in line with what I majored in when I was in college, it just made the referral by my roommate all the more special. I wasted no time in applying, and at one point it seemed almost illegal, seeing as I just basically took the shortcut on my way to be accepted into their internship program. However, this didn't bother me, as I very much knew I was just as talented, determined, qualified, and very much as driven as every other person that was accepted into the internship program. Now moving on, I got acclimatized quicker and much easier than every other participant, and this clearly gave me an edge over everyone else. At the end of the internship program, it was made known to everyone that only 25 participants out of the entirety of the 250 participants that were accepted for the internship program were going to be retained by the company, and they were going to be the ones that had the most to offer the company, basically those that proved their worth to the company within the limited time they had spent. Obviously, I was chosen, along with two of the people I had become friends with along the line. We soon got placed into our respective departments, as this was basically the official beginning of our lives in the company. And this was where I met the one person that would make my time at the company for the next few years a living hell, almost making me want to give up entirely. And this was none other than my direct boss, Mr. Richard, or Richard as I would soon come to know him as, seeing that we would soon spend the next few years as co-workers, even though we first started off on different grounds. Now, at the very beginning of my employment, I was overly eager to work with Richard, as I very well knew that being in his good graces would bring me nothing but success, seeing as he was in charge of multiple departments. Well, not in charge per se, more like he knew the right people in the right place, and he made it seem as though he was all that. He was friendly and very much easy to converse with. Most of all, he was quite receptive. He always made sure that all of those that were under him would be able to come to him whenever a problem were to arise, and this was one of the few things that really got me hyped up about working with him, until I got to know the other side of Richard. Now, as much of a people's person as I had once thought he was also a stickler for the rules, as well as a no-nonsense person. He basically never tolerated failure. Now, I get that this was how he grew up, as I was told by our other coworkers that he came from a family of perfectionists and failure was never an option. But then it would not hurt to give little room for failure, as this would also create room for improvement. I would soon come to find out that things were not all rosy with Richard as I had initially thought, when our department was handed a project by the company's board. The duration of this project was meant to be 6 months to a year, give or take, but Richard was all the more determined to complete this task in as little time as humanly possible. Now, obviously, he should have expected that there were going to be lots of errors along the line, as the situation was clearly not favorable for his coworkers. This, however, did not dissuade him, as he stood firm in his decision. We worked all day and night under immense pressure, all because he wanted to impress the board, and also make a good name for himself, all at the expense of his coworkers. Now, I have to say, I was putting in more work than everyone else, as I hadn't given up on impressing Richard so as to get on his good side. This, however, backfired in the worst way possible, and I would soon come to find out just how cruel Richard could be. Soon enough, the deadline for our first project together was soon upon us, and just as he had strategically planned, everything was all ready on the day he had planned. Every single one of us was thrilled at the fact that we were finally done, and that at the time, we were finally able to catch a break. Little did we know what was in store for us. Now, seeing as I was one of the major contributors to ensuring the success of our work, and also based on popular vote, I was privileged to join Richard in presenting our work to the company's board. This was basically my opportunity to really leave an impression, and spent the entirety of the night before the presentation making sure that everything that I needed was in order and perfectly ready. I don't think there's ever such a thing as being over-prepared, but I can tell you for a fact, I was over-prepared that day. I just had this feeling that nothing could possibly go wrong, until everything eventually went wrong. Richard took the lead and presented our work on that day very accurately, and I supported him as best as I could. Just when we thought that the next things to come out of the mouths of the members of the board would be words of praise and acknowledgement, we were met with critiquing statements and obviously unhappy looks. Basically, we didn't meet up on their expectations, and from what I could gather on the spot, the board had a vision of how they wanted the project to turn out. Richard, however, being a perfectionist and self-absorbed in being a know-it-all, chose to ignore their vision, and instead decided to go along with his own. We were met with serious reprimanding, and just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, when faced with the question of who was responsible for changing the entire plan, Richard looked the other way and immediately pointed to me. I was lost and mostly confused, but all in all, I was in a state of absolute shock. Before I could even say a word, threats were already made on my position as an employee of the company, and seeing as it all happened so suddenly, I couldn't even defend myself. It was at this time that Richard thought to play his cards right and pleased on my behalf that the members of the board be lenient, as he would surely make sure that such never happened again. I was fuming. How could he throw me under the bus like that? After all the effort I put into doing a good job, when things turned south, he immediately shifted the blame to someone else. I couldn't let this slide, but seeing as I was being watched, there was little I could do. I had to stomach my rage and strong desire for revenge, as I knew that my time would soon come, and I was going to be prepared no matter what. Now, it was at this time that Richard completely flipped on me. He started exploiting my desire to work for his own interest, while threatening me at certain times with my job. I was enraged, but I could do nothing. This went on for the better part of the next 5 years or so, until eventually an opportunity presented itself to me, and you can bet your last dollar I was not willing in the slightest bit to let this slide. Now, fast forward a bit to recent times. Richard was up for a promotion, and to test his competence, the board gave him a similar project as the one we both first worked on together. It all just presented itself as the perfect opportunity. I knew what I had to do, and there was going to be little to no effort needed, as I had been preparing for this day for the longest time. The duration for the submission of the project was exactly the same, 6 months to a year, and the contents of the project were the same too. I just had to omit a few details and replace them with the ones of my choosing, and it was done. All I needed to do was sit back and watch him actually get the treatment he deserved 6 years ago when he threw me under the bus. When he went to present the project to the board, they were even more furious, as this project was supposedly for a valuable client, one that the company could not afford to lose under any circumstance. Seeing his incompetence, it was clear to the board that he was no longer a candidate for promotion. The door on that was closed for Richard, but not for me. This was my chance to step up, and that was exactly what I did. I quickly suggested to the board that I fix his mistake right then and there, as I was always prepared for the unexpected. I immediately leapt into action and undid what I had initially done, and in under a few minutes, I had made it seem like I finished the work that took Richard 6 whole months to do, and still make a mistake on. It was clear right then and there. Everything was literally already set in stone. It dawned on Richard sooner than I had expected that his life at the company was basically over. Before we could even realize what was going on, his position at the company was revoked and he was stripped of his ID tag and other company properties that were on his person. He was immediately escorted out of the premises, as the company also didn't take kindly to failures, especially after being given a second chance. The look on his face while he was being escorted out told me all I needed to know, and assured me that my payback was well received and acknowledged. There was no feeling that surpassed how I felt in that very moment. Our next story is how I got my overachieving cousin to back off. I, 19-year-old female, come from a large family. To be more specific, I have lots of cousins. My grandparents gave birth to 6 children who each had 3 kids, like it was some sort of rule. So I had 15 cousins in total, and we all somehow managed to always go to our grandma's place every holiday. The good thing about this was my grandparents' home was large enough to accommodate us all. My grandparents are successful, rich business owners who made lots of investments at a young age. They were smart enough to invest a lot of business, patient enough to wait for the outcome, and while waiting, they find something new that they felt had potential and put their money into it. My grandpa has always been one to give good advice on business and how to run it. And I think one thing that stuck to me among all his many words was the key to being a good business owner was to know how to gamble and be okay with whatever outcome you get, because one right can make up for many wrongs. Essentially, it was how he got his capital to build his own business, but unfortunately he died 4 years later, so it was just my grandma staying all alone in that big house. This was one of the many factors that was put into consideration that got our parents to let us stay with Grams during the holiday, and aside from the fact that I was always tasked with overseeing the little kids who can be a real pain in the ass, staying with Grams wasn't so bad. She had her own private chef, and we all got pampered, although there were days where my other cousins above 16 and I helped out my grandma with business. Each year, she involves us in making decisions that had to do with the business. Last year, she gave us loads of resumes to read and asked who potentially fitted into the right sector we were going for. The year before, we had to choose the best idea we felt could bring more profit. And other times, she would print out many files and ask us to go through every one of them to see if there were errors, and this was the part of the holiday I dreaded the most, simply because the whole point of a holiday was to relax from schoolwork and paperwork. I guess this mindset made me think less of what we were doing as competition and more of free labor, but my other cousins didn't see things that way. To them, Grandma was looking for the best candidate to take over the company when she retired, and she was using that as a tactic to see who had the potential, but I wasn't buying that crap. There were 6 other older children in line before we, the grandchildren. We definitely did not stand a chance, but when I said this, everyone thought I was just trying to get them to back off and swoop in to take all the glory. While I knew I was definitely not interested in running a company, one of my cousins did not see things that way. Tucker was hell-bent on making sure he was the one who got to be Graham's favorite, and he was just too much of a kiss-ass, which annoyed me a lot. He was always making sure the papers were clipped perfectly, or the candidate had the perfect resume, which wasn't the criteria for hiring a person in my opinion, but Tucker knows best. I was fine with the competition. I mean, there was no harm in a little friendly competition between cousins, but Tucker had a way of going overboard trying to screw everyone over just to look good in front of Grams, and I hated that. The first time a funny incident happened, no one suspected anyone because a page was missing from the file given to one of my other cousins, Olivia, and she was so sure she had seen it moments ago. It wasn't something important, so my Grams dismissed it as nothing, but I ended up finding it under the desk and that got sorted. Everyone just assumed it flew off and got lost, and we found it, but I knew Tucker was responsible for tossing the paper underneath the desk because I saw him. Tucker wasn't satisfied with the fact that Grams did nothing. He was looking for something he could use to stir up trouble, so after we were done with sorting out the files and stacking it somewhere safe, it was very strange to see that coffee, a large amount of coffee, had spilled on it, and Grams wasn't very pleased with us for it. We had no idea someone had instigated the whole back then because all we saw was the coffee pot leaking from the edge of the table into the files, so everyone accepted that they were at fault except Tucker, who had somehow stored his file separately after being told to stack it all in one place. He said he was worried about something happening to it, so out of intuition, he set them aside someplace safe. By now, I knew what he was trying to do, so I asked him why he didn't just suggest that before everyone, and he gave me a sour look before responding with he didn't want to cause trouble. In the end, Grams commended him on his good work and sharp intuition, saying she could use a mind like that at the office, which made him more confident around us. The problem with someone like Tucker was that he didn't know when to stop. My other cousins suddenly became the enemies. I'm guessing he saw us as a threat to something that he wasn't even sure was going to be his. But he became less involved with us and was always glued to Graham's side, and this was just a 2-month holiday. I spent the rest of my holiday enjoying good food and spending quality time with my cousins, and we all went back home. I didn't even think I would get the chance to see Grams again until the next year, but after graduating from high school and was unable to get accepted to my dream college, I decided to wait and reapply the next year. My parents felt it was best I went to my Grams company for a few months and maybe learn a thing or two. I wasn't interested in running a company. I wanted to be an engineer, and my parents knew this, but they said it didn't matter. There were several departments in a company, and I would be placed somewhere that had to do with my area of specialization. I reluctantly went and stayed with my Grams. The first month was the worst. My Grams and I fought a lot, and I was always bored because there was nothing much to do in a large house with few people on the weekends, but during the weekdays, I was always at the company. I was able to learn a lot more and slowly adjusted to living with my Grams. We started to talk more and yell less at each other. She advised me on my choices of college and what I needed to look for if I wanted to make a decision on which to apply for. She also helped me out with my application. It wasn't so bad living with my Grams, although it could sometimes get lonely. Before I knew it, it was summer break again, and I was so happy to finally get the chance to see my cousins and have someone of my age range to talk to. I was so excited to see all my cousins, both the little ones and the older ones. None of them knew I had been here earlier, and I wanted to keep it like that because of Tucker and his competitive side. But Grams told them over dinner, and the look on Tucker's face said it all. He wasn't happy at all about the fact that I had spent time at the company. In fact, I'm sure he saw it as a threat to his non-existing position he hoped to claim for himself. This made me become his primary target. Tucker and I weren't much of friends, but we weren't enemies. He never once overstepped. Never messed with me over the years, but that all changed this year. His first attempt to degrade me in front of our Grams was a bust. I had been asked by Grams to get an important document from the office since Grams decided to take a break from work to spend time with her family. She asked me to go get it instead. After all, most of the office staffs knew me. Tucker, being Tucker, gave me a call to tell me my services would no longer be needed, as a soft copy of the document had been sent to my Grams. I almost believed him, but then I remembered the type of person he was, and besides, my Grams was too old-fashioned for that. She would rather get any information she needed on paper instead of using a system. She always said she needed the files as backup no matter how much we try to convince her the world has evolved and she should just keep them in a drive. She would argue and tell us the drive could get lost, but files are reliable, which was why we spent most of our holidays arranging files and looking through different documents. I got to the office, took the file, and went back home to see Grams expectantly waiting for the document upon my arrival. The look of surprise on Tucker's face when I brought out the document was worth it. He tried a couple times to get me into trouble, but I wasn't going down so easily. I knew most of his silly tactics, so I didn't fall for them. This must have made him so desperate to see Grams and I have a fallout, he decided to do something as reckless as posting the recipe to one of the best-selling candies on a fake account he created using my name, and the worst part was how he didn't think of how it could affect Grams' business. I had no idea how he got his hands on those recipes. Grams was always careful with things like this and only showed those she believed needed to see it. Even during hours of sorting out files, I never once came across any file that had to do with recipes, because things like that were kept top secret, but somehow, Tucker managed to get his hands on it and posted it. This managed to attract a lot of other competitors who were looking for means to use this recipe, and it wasn't until a week after we had all left Grams' place we all found out. Grams wasn't happy with the situation. She thought I had betrayed her because I had a lot of access to company's material during my internship and had seen how so many products were being made, but I wasn't going to let Tucker go scot-free for what he did, because I knew Tucker would make a mistake, and he did. He misspelt a word we always made fun of him for misspelling, and I knew that wasn't enough to justify myself, but it was a start. I knew I had to go and meet Grams to clear myself, so I did that and showed her what I got. It wasn't enough to make her believe I didn't do it, but it was enough to make her doubt him. She decided that she was going to look into it, and before the week ran out, they were able to trace the account to Tucker's phone. My Grams wasn't expecting that because she saw no reason why Tucker would do something like that, so I had to explain to her about how he was willing to go as far as sabotaging anyone to be seen as a potential inheritor of the company, and Grams said the same thing I told my cousins, that our parents were the ones she could pass down the company to, as if they were interested, and the only reason she always asked us to work was because she saw it as a means to teach us valuable lessons when it comes to business, not because she wanted to see who was most capable. Grams spoke to him, but there were still punishments for his actions, and according to Grams, he was banned from coming to the yearly vacation house for a while. She feels comfortable enough to have him around, but what hit him hard was when Grams told him there was no way she was passing down the company to any one of us here, but to our parents. That shattered him. I have no idea why Tucker is so obsessed with wanting to take over the company, but he needed to stop going overboard because of some strange entitlement he had over something that wasn't his, and I was glad to have been able to do that. Grams managed to rebrand and add a little twist to her products. It may have gone viral, but she could always make her product unique, and as far as I can tell, it had been doing fine. With that being said, that's all the time we have for today. If you enjoyed today's video, drop a like and comment below, and if you want to check out our other videos, click the video on the right. With that being said, I'll see you all next time.